Welcome to the Universal Diner, where life's flavors blend into authentic conversation. Join us at our spacious corner booth as we discuss and explore various topics such as natural health and wellness, yoga, plant medicines, spirituality, and more. There's always room for you, there's always room for our special guests, and there's always room for insight, intuition, and epiphanies to arise. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Universal Diner. Great to have you here as always. Woo, I'm going to bring it down a notch because I'm here alone with Simone snuggled up on one side of the booth. So yeah, let's make it a little more intimate. Hi, Simone.
Hi. Nice to be here just with you. Not that we don't love brother too, but our dear brother.
We love brother, and this is a date.
Yes. We've been looking over the menu.
We have indeed, and in fact, we have chosen our dish already. And what better dish to share on a date but relationship?
Ship of relation. Yes, we're on a boat.
Ship of relations. I am doing a very bad job of being a good partner and that I keep stepping on your lines. That is definitely one of the top 10 rules. Let her finish, dude.
That's all right. You're forgiven.
Thank you.
But
and I'm
yeah.
going to
There you go again.
Now you're stepping on mine. I'm going to blame the slight delay on Zoom for at least part of this. Because it's always good to place blame. And that's one of our top 10 relationship rules. Blame the other person or something else.
Right. That's why we've made it for as long as we've made it. We just keep blaming the other. No, actually, I quite like our metaphor of the ship of relations because we have literally adventured all around the world. And what better adventure than in a boat? Am I mixing metaphors now? I like to do that too.
Maybe. I'm just happy to hear you speak.
Oh.
And now we're back on track with the actual top 10 rules.
Mm-hmm.
As if there are any rules in a relationship other than respect and love and honoring each other's path. And we'll get to that. And yes, I love this boat metaphor. Simone and I have been sailing around the world together for many, many years. So full disclosure, as it were, Simone and I have been in a long-term relationship since, 2000, early 2000s.
Yeah, 2003 actually was when we first met. And then I think around 2007 or 8, I think we just kind of went, hey, you're still around? Let's do this together.
That is kind of how it happened. And a quick nod and a wink to guys. You can see how I didn't remember the exact date that we got together, which would be a no-no, but I just kind of smoothly bypassed it and bypassed it and rounded up or approximated. Early 2000s. Well, that's close enough.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't put a whole lot of weight on anniversaries so much. Although I guess the idea of markers, I guess, of how long's it been? Well, known each other for well over 20 years. So that's impressive.
Yes, and certainly something to be honored regularly, not just on any given anniversary date at any given point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're not proclaiming ourselves as experts. However, relatively speaking, we know ourselves to be in a very healthy and resilient and loving relationship. And if we were to compare and contrast, not that it's a contest, we have watched the relationships of our friends and family through time. And, we've recognized a lot of perils and pitfalls and also the things that work. And for a wide variety of reasons, ours does. Some things because we attend to them consciously, and some things as a result of a lot of natural chemistry and parallel paths and overlapping paths that occur naturally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. There is this interesting weaving, of, shared values and, as you say, like chemistry and outlook and grace.
Yes. Yes. Some other words we could use is, some of it's luck, some of it's karma, some of it's work. And maybe I can just lay out a very kind of broad vision or kind of worldview, our approach to life that is responsible for it being a healthy, conscious relationship.
Yeah, go for it.
I am certainly not the first person to say this, but in my experience, this thought came to me independent of seeing it anywhere else. Unlike, say, a traditional mainstream marriage ceremony, which is beautiful, a way to celebrate and honor and everything. I'm not diminishing it at all. But there's something about sort of legislating a relationship, sort of creating rules and adhering to some agreement with each other that seems a little bit restrictive, if not stifling. I think a much healthier approach, and ultimately one that is stronger and that allows the relationship to be sustained, again, to be sustained well, to be healthy, is to make a commitment to yourself. And I would love to see a marriage ceremony where the vows are shared, where one person says, I commit to my own personal growth and development, and the other person to say the same. And in doing that, and really, really bowing to your vows, then moment to moment, hour to hour, day in and day out, year after year, you're adhering to your own unfoldment, development, etc. And as an aspect of that, of course, you're going to honor the other and love the other and cherish the other and support them in every way that you can, again, in every moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And it's not to be misunderstood as like something that's selfish. It's selfish in the sense that, yes, one focuses on oneself, but by committing to one's personal growth and evolution, one is also giving that as a gift to the other, right?
Yes, absolutely. That's a wonderful way to put it. That is the most loving thing you can give another person, your commitment to your own growth, evolution, development, whatever word or phrase you want to use. And then everything else radiates out from there. If that is a foundational element, if love and mutual respect is the foundation, then not only is the quality of the relationship going to be as high, as rich, as deep as it can be, it's going to allow for all kinds of things to arise and to be met with love, with heart, with soul. It's less important than what details emerge. And when things come up that might be otherwise ambiguous or outside of the norm, as far as, again, that kind of well-defined structure of a marriage or a relationship or whatever, both parties in their consciousness practice, as a result of their consciousness practice and their open-heartedness, are going to recognize its place in the course of one's lifetime, right? Yours, mine, each other's, and have some space around it to allow for it, to recognize it. It might seem out of alignment, but somehow I recognize, for example, that it's part of your path, or you see it as part of my path.
Yeah. And also, when one is committed to one's own growth, one has to stay open to kind of being called out on things in the relationship where you're like, hey, wait a minute, if the other partner is like, whatever it may be, whatever the issue may be, of bringing to the light, like, hey, there's a rub here, that rather than becoming defensive or blaming or whatever, there's like, oh, well, if I'm committed to my own growth and evolution, maybe there's something here for me to look at. So, it's like, thank you for pointing that out. maybe not necessarily in such a diplomatic kind of way, but in a sense, when you come out of maybe a bit of a dysregulated state and can kind of go, okay, hang on, let me actually go take care of myself, come back and be like, oh, okay, thanks for pointing that out. This is something I can look at. Or actually, no, I feel that was an appropriate response or whatever. And then there's more openness and more dialogue and more communication, right? Which is very key in relationship. And I must say that I think you are a much better communicator than I am. My tendency is to become a bit withdrawn, and you're very good at kind of pulling things out of me and coming back to, okay, let's have a dialogue here.
Well, first, thank you.
Which is maybe a bit unusual. Yeah. Which, might be in a lot of instances, maybe a bit flipped, right? Where women tend to be more communicative and perhaps the man less so. But in our dynamic, I think that's flipped.
Yes, that's probably accurate as far as it goes for various reasons. I have my American outgoingness in part. You have your European reserve, and the broader thing we're speaking to here is that, of course, we're bringing our differences to it, and where one has more to offer, the other has more to offer in different ways, and we meet, we show up together. And I would say, in regards to what you had shared earlier, while there are certainly times to be very direct in a relationship and to commit to or reinforce healthy boundaries in a more direct way, I think we would both agree that as often as possible, you want to be as kind and loving and diplomatic as you possibly can be, bringing something forth. And then that makes it easier for the other person to consider that perspective or that possibility. And then again, bigger picture, if there's openness, spaciousness, love, respect, then you're not doubting those fundamental characteristics every time one person in the relationship says, hey, I don't know about this.
Yeah, exactly. And that really has been, I think, very foundational in our connection is, for one, it's friendship, right? Like there's a profound friendship there that is based in respect, kindness, love, humor. And I think those are the fundamentals in any kind of relationship, right? Whether it's an intimate relationship or just like friendship, right? If I look at my close friendships, they're all rooted in those same values.
Yeah, that's how I see it. And, it's not like Simone and I were born into some enlightened kingdom where we were shown the highest way to approach relationship or anything else in life. We did a certain amount of our own work before we came together, and we probably wouldn't have come together unless we had done that work. There would not have been enough resonance or natural connection. And we were already, I guess, established enough in our grooves, as it were, for the likelihood of continuing on that path, this path of awareness and consciousness expansion, etc., and to deepen it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And probably having been through a number of relationships prior helped, right? To kind of get a little bit seasoned or mature. We were in our 30s when we came together. So still young enough, but having been through a couple of relationships to maybe get through some of the bigger obstacles that often create difficulty in relationships when one is a bit younger.
Sure. We were seasoned or pre-seasoned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Relative to our relationship with each other, we were pre-seasoned. And again, we grew up in the cultures we grew up in and around the people we found ourselves surrounded with, etc. And we were in the same position as everyone else. I think it's just a matter of like, what do you choose? It's like no one gives you a manual on how to raise kids, as they say. Well, no one gives you a manual on how to be in a relationship necessarily. I'm sure there's plenty of guidance out there, but most of us in our kind of Western cultures, we're like, you're young, you're relatively free, you meet someone, you're attracted to them, you start engaging with them, you get together with them, and then suddenly it's like, oh, now what? And then for lack of a better system or framework or whatever, people kind of default to these baseline structures that are pre-established. Oh, well, we've been together for a year. Now it's time to propose, or we need to get married. And well, it's about time to have a family now, or whatever. And other than us having this long-term monogamous, heterosexual, whatever relationship, we don't live according to convention very much at all. In fact, even our quote unquote marriage, we have the most official aspect of it is we have a declaration of common law marriage in Canada. Not that it's any less valid in Canada as anywhere else. And that was all part of me emigrating to Canada at a certain point. Simone is a Canadian citizen who grew up in Switzerland, but is a Canadian citizen. So it was a formality. So, our legal standing is maybe slightly tenuous, not as solid as like presenting a marriage certificate or something. But that's just like the external worldly reflection of what can be, and in our case is this deep, long-lasting, wholehearted, full-souled commitment to each other.
Yeah. And commitment to our soul path and each other's soul path, right? And I think that kind of comes back to what you started this conversation with, this commitment to self, but commitment to each other's unfoldment. And so then it becomes, rather than what can I get for myself, it's also how can I best serve you on your path? How can I support you on your path? Even if what calls you is difficult for me to handle, or vice versa.
Yes, I think that's a really deep groove to explore. And before I speak to it, I just want to acknowledge that I'm being contradictory as I say commitment to each other, where earlier I said, really it's about commitment to yourself. But it's all part of a larger whole of just honoring what life presents, what life is, what is in your life. And there's no reason to ever change anything about our relationship in its most fundamental level, because you're in my life and I am honoring that and honoring you as an aspect of that. Mm-hmm. So that's my effort to clear up any contradiction. We must behold the paradox. And again, as I spoke to earlier, and I think this is what you're touching on now, we might not like what the other person is drawn to, what the other person needs to do or not do in order to honor their path. But if we are conscious enough and loving enough, we're going to recognize it either as it's something you have to do. It's something you have to go through. It's part of your own individual path that isn't, necessarily directly connected with me. And at the same time, to be clear enough and loving enough so that when we do see the other person going sideways or deviating from what we experience as their essential nature or what is in alignment for them, that we come forth and speak to it and support them and help guide them as best we can, or influence each other back to our alignment.
Yeah. I love the term that comes out of, I think it's a Celtic Irish term that speaks about, it's anamkara, and it means soul friend. And that there's, which is a soul friend is, can be an intimate partner or just a very intimate friend, but it is this kind of notion of being committed to the deeper soul path of the other, and therefore honoring those parts of our path that, might look like it's taking us into different directions. And maybe that could be the case. And then, and this is, I think, certainly something that we've seen many times in our own relationship. It's like, we've done this, come together, gone separate ways, come together, gone separate ways, but always somehow stayed in touch. And we did that a lot in the beginning. And then at some point we're like, hey, we keep coming back together. Do you think what's the universe hinting at here? Maybe we're meant to kind of make this a more conscious path together. And yeah, I think, a big part of our synergy is also looking at some of the challenges that have come our way as well. And we've had a number of challenges. We've run a business together, which was both amazing, but also incredibly difficult. We have built a house together. We've dealt with health issues. We've lived in separate countries for long periods of time, and still that is part of our reality. And any one of those things could be reason for many relationships to crumble. And somehow we've navigated those at times stormy seas.
Yes, absolutely. We have. And when I look back, I would say we have navigated them very, very well, all things considered. So we can both pat ourselves on the back and pat each other on the back.
Yes.
For that.
I always remember when we were building, we built a house on raw land in kind of the Canadian wilderness, trying our best to steward the land and create as little impact as we could. We had a wonderful guy who basically built this roundhouse, and we went to open the account at the, what do you call it, like the hardware store. And the woman who opened the account for us, like, looked at us and kind of went, "Well, good luck. Make sure you get along." Do you remember that? And we both laughed. Probably because she has seen so many couples come through there with like starry-eyed, "We're building a house together." And by the end of it, they're probably divorcing.
Now that you remind me, I do remember it. And I'm also remembering how we heard from other sources that one of the biggest stressors for any couple is house building, of course, having kids, et cetera, pretty major. And yes, that woman in that wonderful, pure, polite Canadian way was just doing her best, again, to use that word diplomatic, just to like make us aware of the potential for stress. And I actually think it's one of the top reasons couples separate is, the stresses and strains of building a home together.
Yeah, no doubt. And I guess in some ways she was a little bit of an angel in that it was kind of a forewarning of like, hey, just be mindful of what can come with that process, which is an enormous process and requires an incredible amount of decision making, right down to like the smallest detail.
Yes. Well, while we're going down this house building rabbit hole, the saying that comes to mind, and it's one that I really love, the adage is that how you do anything is how you do everything, and how you do everything is how you do anything. I guess you could look at it that way as well. Now that I think about it, even though I use it a lot, I'm not quite sure which order those words are in. But regardless, moment to moment, it's like, okay, and now this, and how do we be with this, and how do we engage on that? And fortunately, as far as the house goes, we had very, very similar tastes and very similar priorities and such, which allowed for a lot more harmony than could have been there. Because like, if we found ourselves arguing over what toilet to buy, it's probably not about the toilet. And that basically exposes deeper, more fundamental issues or lack of alignment.
Yeah.
I want to kind of touch on this idea of soul friend a bit, and then also on the reality, and I'm speaking it now so I don't forget, the reality that exists for us right now, which is a long-term relationship and a long-distance relationship. So long-term is one thing, long-distance is another. Long-term, long-distance, a path less traveled, I think, for many.
Yeah.
And in regards to this idea of soul friend, I mean, as we see and experience life, the universe and everything, we're just taking this form now, as far as we know. And if we really get down to like the deepest level of relationship, then it's outside of time and space. And now we're in this form, and this is the way that we're meeting, again, in time and space. And it could be an entirely different form down the line. But the recognition, or at least the openness to the possibility that there's so much more than just this. This is just, something emerging from the water for a brief period, is a source of strength and something that sustains the relationship. And I do realize and recognize and honor the idea that that's quite romantic in one sense, this notion.
Yeah, definitely. It's romantic and it's deep because I definitely experience that in our connection. And I speak about these things. I'm kind of taken back to like when we first met. And we've both identified this, like the moment that we first saw each other I was sitting outside a little yoga hall as you came out of the yoga hall in the jungle of Thailand. And we had a moment of just kind of seeing each other. And I know that like, I was thinking, wow, you look familiar. And I know that you've said similar things. Like there was just this moment of like, hey, I know you. And then I'd remember shortly thereafter, because we had quite a love affair that began at that point. And you were joking around saying, hey, this is, just a moment in like time and space. We've known each other as like aliens and, tentacles. And, and I always thought that was very funny. And it always stuck in my mind that like, yeah, we knew each other as these weird alien creatures at some other stage of our soul journeys.
It's very open-minded of you because I think that would be a red flag for most girls. Yeah, on our second date, he said we were aliens in a former life. Yes, there was familiarity, there was recognition beyond, the, superficial attraction or mutual attraction, I would say. And I don't use that word superficial in a dismissive way, but that was just one element. That was, by definition, the surface, and there was more to it, certainly.
Yeah.
I'd like to explore again this idea of our current relationship situation in time and space, right? Long-term, long distance. Talk about time and space realities, but also, and I have our listeners in mind as well, to kind of speak to this idea of open relationships. That's all the rage that really seems to be in vogue at the moment. And, our relationship to the concept of open relationship, and also what we see playing itself out very often. Are you open to
Sure.
open to exploring the idea of an open in the podcast? Well, I guess I'd start with just saying that an aspect of our openness with each other is the allowing for possibility of, as I said before, anything and everything to emerge. And it is that very openness and acceptance that makes the impulse or the idea of bringing in what is surely going to be an additional variable and make for a more complex equation not attractive. Because why? Because I'm not being denied anything. I don't feel separated from anything or anyone. Our relationship is open and spacious and loving. And as an aspect of that spaciousness, it's like endless, infinite. So why would the desire be there other than on some superficial level? Like, why would you want to go there? Why would you complicate things? Why would you bring some other element into this beautiful open field? So I think that's one aspect of it.
Yeah, there's a few things that come to mind. I mean, one is dynamics and like chemistry of relationships always are a bit different depending on, what two people are coming together, and that and certain things surface within the relationship of, what needs to be dealt with. And I'm totally losing it.
Okay, sweetheart. Sweetheart. Well, I'm happy to pick up the baton and run with it a bit here. I feel clear, if I may. Okay.
Yeah.
So as part of our long distance thing, it's early for me and it's late for Simone. And so there's some challenges for both of us in that. So yes, there's ebb and flow and, the dynamics of attraction and all of this, of course. And our situation is such that it would lend itself well. It would be kind of an obvious choice to commit to, as it were. There's that word again, an open relationship, but I have no desire to do it for various reasons. I like simplicity, the emotional attachment and the energy that would go into it. It's just, I don't have that to give. I wouldn't want to do it. The it just wouldn't be anywhere close to worth even experimenting with it. That's just my own take on it. But then to kind of speak to what we see, please, if you find yourself back on.
Well, just there were two things that I wanted to speak to. One was just the notion of complication, right? When more than two people, it's complicated enough when there's two people. When, suddenly you're dealing with multiple personalities, it's just seems very complicated. But I think on a deeper level, I think, this was something that stood out for me in our meeting, was that there was some recognition that there was something very sacred in our connection, and that needed to be kind of cared for. And I remember, something my mom told me years ago that really stuck with me. And it was like, in a relationship, it's like tending to a flame, like it can easily be blown out. So there's a fragility and a sacredness in profound connection. I mean, of course, I'm not ruling out there are relationships, one night stands and flings and short-term relationships that all have their value. Like, I'm not saying that it's all about having one big, long relationship, but I'm just saying when there's a recognition that there's something deeper, that what draws you together that has this potential of depth has also something fragile. There's a fragility and a tending to that flame that requires attention and care, and all those elements to tend to that flame are kindness and respect and honoring and communication and friendship and lightness and humor. And so all of these things, I think, are the ingredients that it takes to look after that flame. And if one pushes too much in the direction of, disrespect or dishonoring, or, just thinking like, it's fine. I'll call you a bunch of names and a fit of anger, and then say, oh, I'm sorry. Like, that's pushing the limit where you're not tending to you're not caring for it. You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
when one, has moments of getting angry or upset with the other person, that, again, that commitment to one's own growth and evolution is like, how do I take care of my own self-regulation? How do I take care of my own moments when I'm so upset with you that in the moment I hate you, kind of, but I don't, but I'm going to go tend to that myself. And then come back with care, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Well said. Wise words from your mom. I don't experience that state of mind or heart towards you. It's extremely rare that I feel that pinched in regards to my feeling towards you. You're welcome to have that experience. Maybe we should talk about it offline.
Yeah, no, and I'm not implying that happens often, but I'm just saying in general, one can experience in relationships moments when you're really, really frustrated, or you don't feel heard, or you don't feel that the other person quite understands, or that's part of relationship territory.
Yes.
So for some people, it cycles up daily, and for others, it's not quite as common. And I'd say with us, it isn't a common occurrence. Although I think over the years, we've also managed to work through a lot more. I think there were certainly a lot more fiery moments in our earlier years of being together where we were still navigating, like, what does it mean to be in relationship, and how does that look, right?
Yes.
And we actually had a few agreements at the time. Like, there were times when we noticed that we would kind of be impatient with each other. And in those moments of impatience, we weren't able to communicate it. And then outside those moments when we were like actually able to communicate, we would say, hey, in those moments, just give me a little like signal, a little sign that like you just back off, or I just need a moment. And I remember one of the metaphors we used was like a puppy who was like overly rambunctious, and you like have a newspaper and just like swat him on the nose, which is probably not the best thing for even a puppy, but just the kind of visual of like, hey, okay, it's enough now, stop. And do you remember that? And so in moments, sometimes rather than having an argument, be just like newspaper. It was like the code word or something. Do you remember?
A little bit, not that specifically. Yeah, I think it's more of just like lightly tapping a puppy on the nose, ever so gently. That's all it took. But yeah, now that you mention it, I do remember that we had to cobble together a few bamboo rafts, a little bit of structure to and some guidelines to kind of help us cross the river. And I think now we can kind of let those rafts go. We kind of let those tools go because we have crossed the river for the most part. Not because it's a priority or important, but I feel the desire to speak to what I see about these open relationship situations, just because I think it's of service. And again, the underlying nature of our relationship is openness. And so the idea of like, something else contained within that, is kind of funny, like open relationship, but how open is it actually? And on that note, Simone and I have spent a lot of time in these kind of alternative meccas that are filled with a lot of young people, because those are the people that are usually the most open-minded and progressive and, trying to do things differently and, whatever. And these places cater to that. And, they're fueled by, so when you're young, you have a lot more sexual desire and energy in general. And you also have the desire for pairing, like the obvious thing is like, on some level, a female in particular, but certainly plenty of men want to mate, they want to have children. And then we also come out of these cultures, pretty much all cultures are like this, where there's some hangups about sexuality, like there's something, there's guilt, and there's also just natural, self-protection, self-protectiveness, all these things that we bring in all this baggage into it. So you get in these youth meccas with a lot of like young, beautiful people that are like doing yoga and, that are like cool and traveling the world or whatever. And it's juicy, it's attractive. So people get together, but we have all these trips that we bring in. And so they kind of contrast, they kind of conflict with each other. So what I see is that we're making all kinds of rationalizations often to try to justify our natural sexual behavior. A lot of neo-tantra is like this, as I see it, for instance. And then, again, what seems to be in vogue at the moment more than ever, it's had its day back in the 60s and whatever too, is this open relationship stuff. And what I usually see, and there's some humor in this, is that there's a couple, they're in these like youth sexy meccas, they're into each other, but the dude still wants to sleep around. So it's usually the dude's idea, like, hey, let's have an open relationship, baby. And yeah, it's okay. And, we'll do our own thing. And it's like spiritual and high-minded and we're all one and let's just share. And then that happens for a while. The woman has a real challenge. This is broad strokes, but very common. The woman has a lot of issues with it, but really wants the connection of the relationship. So is doing her best to kind of bend and yield and be with it. And it's all fun and games until the woman decides to act on it. The female, whatever, the girl decides to act on it. The dude then suddenly realizes, oh my God, I hate this. I can't handle it. I don't want this. I want it for me, not you. Again, this is very like old school patriarchal. All this shit comes up suddenly in the mix, and it's often responsible for the dissolution of a relationship, which in part speaks to men's lack of ability to navigate the breadth and depth and nuance and subtlety of emotions and heart, where the woman, in general, is much more adept at it, but doesn't want to do it because doesn't need to do it. Troy's take on open relationships.
Right. Yes. Well, and I think it's also like, especially in these so-called spiritual circles, and I really do say so-called, is that there's a bit of a bypass happening where, it gets cloaked as spiritual, but really there's a whole bunch of unresolved issues that are surfacing in the context of these kinds of relationships. And it's not seen for what it is, whether it's, rooted in childhood issues or trauma and abuse and, all of the dysfunction that comes out of how were raised within families and cultures and so on. And then it also being kind of like a rebellion too against the repression of sexuality and all of that, right? So
Yes.
it's kind of a big, messy mix. And, there probably are a few people in the world who are truly could handle, the notion of polyamory and so on. But really, it just seems like it's a pretty big, messy thing in a lot of these communities. And, I think the other thing, and this is just a little bit of a side topic, but, a lot of these communities also, there's a lot of, like constant detoxing and juice fasting and all in the context of like yoga and high vibration living and raising consciousness and all of these things. And then people are endlessly, doing all kinds of fasts and cleansing. And really, it's just masking eating disorders that, again, is linked to all of the unresolved stuff that is bubbling under the surface of our basic human dysfunction.
Yeah.
But that it's sort of masked as these spiritual practices. So yeah, that's just, a topic for another day, but in a way kind of rooted in similar symptoms, right? Of deeper stuff that unless you're really committed to a conscious inquiry and exploration of like, what is at the root of my behavior, again, coming back to the commitment to one's own growth and evolution, then you start to dig into some of these areas that is beneath the surface of what looks all fancy with polyamory and fasting and cleansing and all the bendy yoga and, all of that stuff. It's like, well, what's truly the path of soul work?
Yes, absolutely. Those are all great examples, additional examples of this spiritual bypassing and being top heavy in the chakras and, kind of breaking free and wanting to move beyond trauma and thinking you're moving beyond it. And it's just a stage of development that's an aspect of youth, and a certain amount of people that go through it are going to become wiser and understand, what was involved. And we've both been through that in our own ways. I certainly have, and it takes time. It's, a lot of times you're just trying to mask pain and trauma and, again, justify your desires and all of that. And ultimately, they don't need to be justified. I think it's just about like, let me be honest with what is arising in me. Yes. And then how do I steward that in a way that is mindful, heartful, all of this. And also, I want to acknowledge the flip side of open relationships and everything, and also express my resonance with the idea that in a utopia or in an idyllic, maybe tribal context, and maybe humans have actually been in this situation a lot, when you look at the history of humanity, we're all here together. All of the children are all of our children. We're going to be together. We're going to love each other. We're going to support each other. We're going to take care of each other. And as such, there's probably a lot less possessiveness. I mean, I think it's primal to some degree, but it's also kind of like the idea of private property, like that's an absurdity. It doesn't exist in nature. We create the concept. So it's kind of like that idea of like, that somehow came out of patriarchy, like, the woman is the man's property and all of this. I understand that like that's horrific, toxic, everything else. And our natural state and or our highest state is just like, let's love freely and let's share and let's take care of each other. But it takes the whole equation. It's not just like, let me enjoy some stimulus and, satiation or whatever. And then, there's no responsibility. It's part of a whole. And this whole idea of open relationships removed from the larger context of, hey, it's just us for life, built into the system. Well, then it lends itself to a lot of problems, but I can appreciate the spirit of it. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, one of the words that pops out that you just said was responsibility, right? It's responsible towards oneself, but also towards honoring the other or others, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and if you break down the word responsibility, it's the ability to respond. And I think a lot of, certainly in my own experience, when I experience fear in myself of like something I don't want to look at, or, you know, something I don't want to like approach with you, it's because there's some kind of fear inside of me of like, oh, that's going to cause me pain or you pain. And often avoiding it just actually does create pain. So I've learned to kind of be like, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath now and put it on the table and communicate about like this. Here's something I have a concern about, or I'm even scared about, and letting you know openly, like, this is really difficult for me to put on the table because I'm afraid you might leave. I'm afraid, you know, I might lose you. I'm afraid you might judge me. You know, all of the things that come up because there's this foundation of respect and kindness and willingness to kind of be with what is uncomfortable. I think over the years I've gotten more able to be like, okay, let's put this on the table. And I think we just recently revisited the idea of, because we spend so much time apart, like it's months and months and months at this point, we were like, hey, how are you? Do you need to go outside of the relationship to have some of your needs met, right? Like we had that honest conversation not too long ago. And of course, one could avoid that conversation altogether because it's like, la, 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 la. I don't want to hear it. There could be an agreement in the relationship around like, look, you go take care of your needs. Just don't tell me. And that might be one way of being in relationship. But for us, it seems more important to be like, well, I might not like what you have to say, but I'm going to ask you anyways, are your needs being met? Do you need to go outside of the relationship to meet your needs? I understand if that might be the case. And I need to be okay with whatever your answer is going to be, right?
Yes. A couple of things come up. One, to make it easier to tie a bow on it, just like the major fear in our lives is the fear of death. The major fear in a relationship is the dissolution of it. And if we can be with that and be open to that and not be hiding it or suppressing it or anything else, then ultimately we reduce the reasons for that fear in the first place. And we are not here giving advice. We are not here projecting an image. We're just sharing our experience. And if we were to give advice, be true to yourself. And if you really are true to yourself, then you're going to honor everything else around you. And this is the highest way to engage in relationship. Thank you all. Bless you all. We'll see you again soon.